can hear about our AIM students that went to Alaska. They're back from their missions trip, and I am so excited to hear what God did. I heard a little bit about it yesterday, and it is very, very cool. So Pastor Josiah, would you welcome them up? And actually, can I welcome them up and have everybody just go? So would you guys come on up? Would you give them a hand, church? Come on. Welcome them up here.
Thank you. And before the students can start sharing here, I'm going to pass it to my wife, Emily, and she's going to tell you guys a little bit just about Alaska and what life is kind of like there even, because a lot of things that will be said this morning may not make complete sense without a little bit of background, because, man, it was an amazing place, but it's about as close as you can get to going to another country without a passport, both geographically and culturally, so.
Hi, I'm Emily. We were in Alaska, and we weren't in, like, mountainy, vacation-y, I'm going to go salmon fishing in a creek, Alaska. We were on the tundra, and we actually have a map up here of Alaska, and you can see you really can't see. It's humongous. It's a huge state. A lot of people forget how big it is, but we were actually, you can see that dotted line right there is the Arctic Circle, and we were in a little town called Kotzebue, Alaska, and if you zoom in, it's right there in that bay, and it's on a peninsula, so there's a lot of fishing that goes on there, but Kotzebue is a town of 3,500 people, which is really big for that area. Well, are we able to slow down a little bit on the pictures? It's really big for that area. There's just a lot of little villages up kind of past the Arctic Circle. So that's Kotzebue. You can see it's on a very small peninsula. And it is actually 75% Inupiaq, which is another word for Inuit, Native Alaskan. And the fun thing about being there at this time of year is that it is sunny basically all the time. The sun never set while we were there, because we were there over summer solstice and everything. So it was crazy to go outside, and at 2 a.m. There are still people walking around and playing basketball.
That's fun for the first 3 days.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's
hard for your body to adjust. We don't have that same slow, it's time to go to sleep now, it's getting dark, it's very, light all the time. You got to get the sleep masks and the shades on the windows. But it was really interesting because it really affects kind of life there, especially in the summer months. Even kids stay up extremely late into early morning hours. We were hearing 3, 4, 5 o'clock. People would stay up, and then they would sleep in. And it's a small enough town. Basically, everyone knows each other. So the kids are just kind of wandering around the streets, riding their bikes all hours of the early morning. And it was kind of crazy because it was total culture shock. That's just so different than what we experience here. So our trip looked like this. We were able to be there for 2 Sunday services. So Josiah took that and preached both the Sunday services we were there. Sundays. We were there from a Sunday to another Sunday. And then some of our students did worship, which was really fun. And we just got to meet people at the church, and they shared. We had 2 ladies from a church. You'll see a picture of it later, where they were singing hymns for us in Inupiaq, which was really cool. And then for the rest of the week, Monday through Friday, we did a VBS. We actually did Mega Sports Camp. And because up there, they basically basketball and wrestling is kind of the only thing they do. We did a basketball. We weren't ready to wrestle with some kids. But we did a basketball Mega Sports Camp, which is really great because none of these kids play basketball, or some of them have in the past, but none currently do. But it was so fun. And that just shows that if you haven't volunteered for this Mega Sports Camp yet, anybody can do it. It's just a really cool time. And then at night, we would do a youth rally. So that was really enjoyable. We did a youth rally, and we had quite a few kids that came. It was 15 to 20 kids a night, which is really unheard of in that area, which is really fun. So they love basketball. We actually were able to set up some brand new hoops for the church, and it was crazy to look out the window at 2 a.m. and there's kids, elementary, high school kids out there playing basketball in front of our church that we were serving at 2 in the morning. So that was really fun and interesting and different. But it's a decently Christianized area. They have an understanding. Most people would say they know, they know about Jesus. They know about God. There's been missionaries there in the past. But a lot of people aren't necessarily living for the Lord, and there's not a lot of churches in that area that really preach the word. The church that we served out did. But it's definitely a hub to other villages. While we were there, we were hearing from an elder in the Inupiaq community who lives in a smaller village outside of Kotzebue, and she was saying, people in the villages are talking about what you guys are doing in Kotzebue, and that was really cool to hear that we were having an impact even after we'd only been there for 2-3 days. We served their senior pastor is named Pastor Bo, and he was just awesome. He's a white. He's not from Kotzebue originally. Well, he's actually Native American and white, but he's from the lower 48. And then the woman he's dating her name is Elsie, and she's the Inupiaq elder I was talking about. And she shared a lot of their culture with us and just a lot of wisdom from the Lord. She loves Jesus and had a lot of great wisdom and was such a wonderful contact in the community for us to work with. But just a few other cultural things. Alcohol is a really big problem there. It wasn't uncommon for us to encounter people just stumbling around town. The house next door had the ambulance arrive there a couple times due to alcohol-related incidents. The house next door to the church. And then also on the pictures, you'll also see us eating some Inupiaq food. One in particular is muktuk. And muktuk is, it's a whale blubber, and it's often raw. And it's, you can see the dark part when the picture comes is skin, and then on the bottom it's the whale blubber. So everybody there really, honestly, I never met anyone there who didn't like it. So it was really interesting. It was chewy, tasted kind of fishy. I've never had scallops. Josiah said it was really similar to scallops. So yeah, we had a really great time, learned so much, learned about the culture, and just loved serving the Lord there.
And one other thing before we get started, then the first person down there can just get going when I'm done. You'll see it looks like the city's almost kind of trashy. It's not really, in the sense of they almost are forced to somewhat be hoarders. A 2x4 down here would cost, what would it cost, $1.25 for an 8-foot 2x4? Whatever it would be. $17 up there in Kotzebue, where we're at. You'll see a picture of brisk iced tea that's 99 cents at gas stations here. It's like $4.75 up there. Like prices, it's $13 for a bag of potato chips. Just crazy prices, so they hang on to everything.
Sorry, I forgot to mention, there's no roads into the town. You only can fly into the town. There's roads within the town, but there's no roads to the town. So everything has to be flown through plane or shipped in, and that's one of the reasons why it's so expensive.
Yeah, it's considered the bush. Anything off the road system in Alaska is bush. So, yeah, with that, let's, Evan, go for it.
Hi, my name is Evan. So on my trip, I was during worship at our first youth rally. I kind of just heard from God to tell me to go pray for this little girl, and she had her leg was all messed up and was kind of having trouble walking. At that time, I kind of struggled a little bit doing that. Didn't really want to step out of my comfort zone. I was kind of doubting that is from God, but before I could even get a chance after that to react to it, I missed my opportunity. Later that night, on one of our debriefs, I was kind of just convicted by God to obey Him when He's asking me to do things and the impact that would be able to make. So the next day, I was in worship again. We're worshiping with the youth rally, and I kind of just heard from God to tell me to go pray with this kid named Bobby. He's off in the back corner, and so I didn't want to disobey, so I just turned around and started walking towards that direction. And I was like, well, I'm already heading over here now. So then I walked over to them, and then I kind of just prayed with them a little bit, and I got to see the fruit of that. So later that week, towards the end of the week, I just ended up sharing my story with Bobby, and kind of just told him that he can become a Christian, he can give his life to Christ today, and I told him he could do it tomorrow or 20 years from now. It's his choice, and I assured him that it was the best choice that I have ever made in my life. And then after that, I just saw him kind of come out of his shell. He was really shy, and he warmed up to me a lot. Him and his friends were throwing rocks at the window at 1 a.m, yelling for me, trying to get me to come outside and play basketball with them. And they just wanted to hang out with me a lot. And that was really cool. Since then, I've just been pressing in to God a lot more. And when I hear from him, I've been just obeying that and going after that. And another thing that happened on our trip was during one of our debriefs, there's a question that said, what is something you are willing to throw your life into or die for? And I was praying about it, and almost instantly, God told me youth ministries. So about 3 or 4 years ago at Lake Geneva church camp, I was there, and I felt a calling to be a youth pastor. And since then, I kind of just doubted a little bit that was God, and I wasn't really sure. I was more confused, and so God kind of just reassured that in my life and strengthened that. And so I guess throughout this trip, I've become more bold and just seeking out God and his voice.
And at the end of that week, Bobby did give his life to Christ. It's really cool.
I'm Sarah, and so like what Emily said earlier was when Elsie was talking about the local villages, saying that we were making an impact, it kind of shocked me because we're a bunch of teenagers that are just doing a missions trip, and you're not really expecting to be making an impact, but we were making a big impact in just a short couple of days that we were there, and it was really cool to see that. Another thing that did really shock me, though, was that just there's 3 and 4 year olds wandering on the streets by themselves, and that no one really seems to care where they are. And it just really shocked that the parents don't really care what the kids are doing because alcohol has taken over their lives, or they just are on drugs, or other things are happening in their lives, like they don't care about their kids. And that was really shocking to me. Because of this trip, I've definitely become more confident, because I had to go and talk to people and had to pray with people, which was really cool to be able to do that. And I just become so much more confident in that. And I've also grown my faith in God. I'm reading the Bible more, and I'm praying more, and just I'm glad I went on this trip. And also kind of got a reminder of what my calling is. And so pretty sure middle school area, I've decided that I've always wanted to be in the FBI, and just didn't have a reason for it. I just thought it'd be really cool and fun. It'd be a good job to have. But during our called conference, God called me to be in the FBI, but to help stop human trafficking. And he just, with the same question, what passion are you willing to throw your life into or die for, I got human trafficking, and to do that, just to be in the FBI. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but that's what God has called me to do.
Hi, I'm Gwen. I'm 15, And this missionary trip was beyond incredible. I could tell you story after story of how this changed my life and how it impacted the people of Kotzebue. And it was just amazing, this trip. It was the biggest part of my life going on this trip. It has changed me so much in so many ways. I guess it opened my eyes to how much I love missionary work, though. Going on to this trip, working with the kids, I got to work with all the second graders. They were really, really well behaved, and they were enthusiastic, and they were doing the dance moves, and they're having fun. And in the beginning of the week, they're coming, it kind of seemed just either for the basketball or the prizes. But by the end of the week, I could see that they showed an actual interest in learning about who Christ was. They were getting into the Bible stories. They were listening more, and they started asking me questions. I loved seeing that I made an impact in these kids' lives. One of the biggest moments also was at the end of the trip, we had the last youth service was, it was amazing to see how many of the youth, the teenagers that were coming, decided to make God a part of their lives. When I think there was about 25, but 12 of them decided to give their lives to Christ. That was incredible for me to see, like, firsthand that I was helping to make a difference. I absolutely loved going on this trip so much. Yeah.
Hello. I'm Carissa. I'm 15, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background info before this trip. So basically before this trip, we wrote little expectation letters where we just had a bunch of questions that we would answer. And then one of the questions was, what do you want God to do in your life on the trip? And my answer was to show me what my calling was. And also before the trip, we also went to Called Conference, which is kind of like an AIM training thing. I don't know how to explain it. And after that, Guatemala had kind of been like on my mind a lot, and I didn't really know why. Like, I didn't know if God was calling me to do it, but like if he was at that point, I just didn't really want to go to Guatemala. Like, I just didn't feel like doing it. And basically night 6 on debrief, it was debrief for like 2 or 3 hours every night. Basically night 3, night 6, one of the questions was, what is one injustice that God is calling you to fight against? And, what is it? Kids who don't, like, have the opportunity, bless you, kids that don't have the opportunity to have an education just came into my mind. And I was like, but, like, we live in a country that kids do have an opportunity to go to like, have an education. And then once again, Guatemala just came into my mind. And I just felt so convicted at that point because the whole couple months before this trip, I had just been denying the fact that God was calling me to Guatemala and just didn't want to accept it. And then basically on the trip, I just accepted that that was my calling. So my calling is to be a missionary to Guatemala. And that was exactly like one of the prayers that I wanted God to answer for me on the trip. And coming back from this trip now, I've kind of learned to trust God a whole lot more, like, with my life at this point. And also, my heart has just kind of changed a lot because over the trip, every day, God would kind of give me just a characteristic to kind of work on for that day. One night was trust, and then another night was compassion. And I would just keep on getting these little characteristics to work on every night. And it truly just worked a lot. So, yeah, that's me.
Hello, I'm Olivia. I'm 18. My favorite part of the trip was working with my kindergartners. I had 3 to, I believe, 6-year-olds, and they were amazing listeners, and I loved hanging out with them, as well as in the night when we did the youth rallies, hanging out with the youth and seeing how passionate everyone was to learn about Christ and hang out with us and just have a good time and be in a safe place where they could be themselves, and that was so amazing. And to see a quarter of the elementary school come through, we had over 100 kids, and to see 25 teenagers come, it was incredible and unheard of, to have that many teenagers come to one place consistently and come back and want to hear about Christ was amazing. And through the trip, I realized how much I need to trust God, and how easy sometimes I forget I have it, how blessed I am, and how much I truly need to rely on my relationship with Christ and not brush away that time that I need to spend praying and talking to God, hearing from God, and reading my Bible. And I've learned that I cannot take that time for granted, and that I need to do that and stop making excuses to why I can't or why I don't think I have the time or whatnot. But so I have heard from God during our debriefs every night, which were also amazing. We've heard a lot about them, spending that intentional time in maybe a quiet place. And I don't know if Josiah is going to elaborate on this, but just knowing that there's Alaska, you don't have to be in Alaska. You can be in your room or in your living room or whatever. Just spending that quiet, intentional time, hearing from God and asking those specific questions, and being okay with the answers and obeying, and when you don't get an answer, and that's also in God's time. And just, that was my part of the trip.
Hi, my name is Michaela, and I'm 17. Yeah. I just have to think about that. So every night we would have a debrief for about 2 to 3 hours, like they've been saying, and it would just kind of start out with what happened during the day, what impacted us spiritually, and then we would, have a set of 2 or 3 questions, and we would spend an hour to an hour and a half on that, just praying over them and talking about that. And during the trip, during one of the nights, it was the same question that everyone's been talking about. This worked better when I went first. What would you pour your life into or die for? And I, for the past year or so, I've had this recurring just missions. And so it was really cool for me just to go on this trip, just to be able to fulfill at least a part of that. But while I was there, just to hear that was what I'm supposed to be doing, and I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know where that means going, but just figuring out just that huge part of my life that was so uncertain was just really cool to figure out. And then every morning we would do about a half hour, 45 minutes just of devotions, of reading our Bibles, and then just sitting and praying and listening for God. And that has completely changed my life, because that's now what I do every morning. And I spend that intentional time, which isn't something that I was really doing enough of before the trip. And just to do that right away in the morning it completely changes your entire day, because when you start your morning with Jesus, your entire day is Jesus. And that's kind of how it should be. So that was really cool to see.
All right, my name is Emma, and I'm 17. So with my life, I didn't grow up in the church, but I didn't not grow up in the church. I knew who Jesus was, but I didn't always come. And for me, it was just really cool to see all the elementary school kids that were able to learn about Jesus at a younger age, and then come and continuously come and then give their lives to Jesus. That was something really big that I really loved seeing. And yeah, and then another thing was during our youth rallies, I met this girl named Chloe, and she's in college. She was coming, and I sat down, I talked with her, and we connected over the fact that both of our parents are divorced, and that's just something that I was able to share with her, and how God was able to help me get over anything that I was holding against that and everything like that. So yeah, it was really cool, and I loved going, and I can't wait to go on another one. So that's about all I got. I really don't like speaking in front of people. So
Hi, guys. I also was really impacted on the trip. And I think, and I feel like I feel kind of bad because I'm piggybacking off of them. But as a leader coming on the trip, all you want is for your students to, not only do you want to impact Kotzebue, but really we want the trip to have a lasting impact on the students. And that was just so cool to see day after day, them spending time in God's Word and spending time in prayer and being challenged and listening to the promptings of the Holy Spirit. Evan praying over Bobby and going out to play basketball with him all the time, even when he was so tired and didn't want to, but he still, felt like that's what God wanted him to do. And to see, Carissa hear her calling and Michaela hear confirmation of her calling, and just everybody following. That's just a few, but I was just so inspired by them. And really just the example that they set, even for Josiah, Adam, and I, and how they can be an example for the church too. So that was really inspiring for me. And really what I have taken away from the trip is just that intentional time with God every single day, spending time expecting God to move. Alaska is a special place to us now, and Kotzebue is a special place to us now because we heard from God there, and that's a place that now is super dear to our hearts. But the thing is, like people have been saying, there's nothing special about being on a mission trip or Alaska. I don't take that as don't go on a mission trip, but God can meet you where you're at if you come before Him expecting to be moved by God. And so that's really what I've been trying to do is have my devotions and I'm busy just like you guys. I'm a mom. I have 2 little boys, and they take up a lot of my time, but I need to purposely carve that time out of my day to pray and to read God's Word and to be constantly be filled by God, so that we can, share Jesus here, even in Duluth.
All right, and as that mic's being passed down to Adam, we purposely saved Adam for last. The majority of our group is very introverted, didn't want to talk in front of people, didn't want to always spend time with people, and we even had introvert time every afternoon, which is a very, very important time, we realized, between the mega sports camp and the youth rally for everyone to kind of recharge. But we were just amazed and very proud of the students and how they stepped out. And so Adam's going to share here. He has a couple, just 2 stories that are absolutely amazing that happened, and God kind of spoke to him. And then I'm just going to give a very, very brief challenge just to you guys at the end of this, and then we'll be done here. So just a little bit longer here, and this is definitely worth it. So I would not sneak out early if I were you.
My name's Adam. What I wanted to say to begin with is, you hear it all the time that God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. That played true with every single one of us on the trip. We all are in our shell. We don't want to talk to anybody. We don't want to, we're not very outgoing people. But on this trip, every one of us was pulled out of our shell during our debriefing time, during, answering questions and just being with each other for so much time with God. We're all spending all of our time with God doing His work, and it's just an amazing time. But on the trip there, the first Sunday we were there, we put together some basketball hoops, and Josiah and I walked around the church, trying to find. You guys can see from the pictures that it was, there's stuff everywhere. So we needed to hold these basketball hoops down with something. So we walked around trying to find cement blocks or something heavy that we could put, weigh it down with. We didn't find anything around the church. So then Josiah went off to do something else. And God told me, walk around the church again. So I said, okay. I just went around it, but I'll do it again. So I would start walking around the church, and there's this house that's maybe 10 feet away. And there was a guy standing there. So I asked him, I says, hey, do you know of any cement blocks around here? And he says, no. He says, maybe the city, talk to them. But he says, are you part of this church? And I said, no, I'm a leader on the missions team from the lower 48. He said, oh, okay. And then he comes down off the porch and he starts talking to me. And you can tell he was having a hard time. And he told me, he says, I just come back from Cemetery Hill. There was pictures up there that's me and Rodney talking right there. But he just come down from Cemetery Hill visiting his dad's grave, and it was Father's Day. And he was really tore up about it. And he said on the way back, he stopped at the 2nd Street Bridge to jump in and commit suicide. But he said, something told me, he says, keep walking, Rodney. And so he walked to the edge of the bridge, or, to the end of the bridge, and he turned around to go back and jump off. And again, he heard, keep walking, Rodney. So then, I don't know if when I was talking to him, if that was 10 minutes after he got back or 2 hours after he got back. But I told him, I said, God loves you, and he brought us together right now so we could talk. And we talked for, 45 minutes to an hour about God and about his dad and about, life in general. And, I said, God loves you. We love you. Your family loves you. Everybody, that you're here for a purpose. And we talked while we were talking, he was, he must have shook my hand 50 times. I mean, and then he was sharing stories out of the Bible. He said, wasn't there a story in the Bible where a woman was brought to Jesus to be stoned? And then I told him the story. As soon as he mentioned that, I knew the story in the Bible he was talking about the woman caught in adultery, and she was brought to Jesus to be stoned. And Jesus said, anybody who hasn't sinned can throw the first stone. And one by one, everybody left until it was just her and Jesus. And then he said, go and sin no more. So I told him that story, and then we were talking about his dad and his dad. I told him, I said, wherever your dad is, I said, he's screaming at you right now to get back with God, to get right with God. Rodney told me that he was a Christian. His mom was a pastor and his grandma was a pastor. He went to school, or he went to church every day, or every Sunday when he was a kid. But he had fallen away, and he had gotten in the wrong crowd, and he said he felt like he had the devil on his shoulder, and he was just kept all the temptation and all the different things and the sins that then they have. And he told me once, he said, how could God love a sinner like me? He says, how could God love a sinner like me? And I told him, I says, Jesus came to this world for sinners. He didn't come to this world for the people that think they're righteous. I said, he came to this world to save sinners like you. I said that he absolutely loves you, and he wants you to come back to him. He said he was saved, but he had fallen away. And while we were talking, he'd keep touching his chest with his hands, and he'd reach to the sky, and he'd say, you can't believe the weight that you've lifted off of my shoulders talking to you. And he kept blessing that we were talking, that God put us together. And he mentioned another Bible story about, he said, wasn't there a poor man and a rich man that both died? And the poor man went to heaven, the rich man went to hell. And I says, yeah, that's Lazarus and the rich man you're talking about. So I told him the story, and he says, wasn't there, can you dip your finger in water and quench my burning tongue? I told him the story, and it just you could just see the relief in his eyes and his face, and we're both crying as we're talking. And, he hugged me at one point, and I told him that I wanted to see him in church and service. I told him we had VBS and, youth rallies. I said, you're welcome to come, and I'll hang out with you, and we'll talk, and, we'll get to know each other more. He didn't end up coming to any services, but later that Saturday, the next Saturday, I did see him in the post office. For whatever reason, Pastor Bo said, we were supposed to be doing our devotions in the morning, Pastor Bo, he said, come on, Adam. So we were going to the post office. I said, okay. So then I got in the truck with him. We went to the post office, and as I was walking out of the post office carrying a bunch of boxes for him, I saw Rodney again. And he looked just 100% better. I mean, he looked just, clean and like he was doing right. And it was just it was amazing to see him again. He said he was going to come back to church and he was going to get right with God. Another story that he told me is he says, I get this dream all the time. And he says, I dream that I die. And he says that I'm with the angels. And he said, all of a sudden I feel like I'm falling. And he says, I'm falling and falling. And he says, then he wakes up before he stops falling. And he says, I have this dream all the time. I told him, I said, that's God telling you that you're falling away from him and you need to get back with God. You're sinning and you need to get back with him. And he was just so relieved to hear from me and that God put us together. And I'm not one to go talk to people. I like to sit back by the computer and watch the kids and do things here. I don't get out and talk to a lot of people, but this pulled me out of my shell, and it was just an amazing experience. Another thing that happened is during our debrief one night, like they say that we'd have 2-3 hour debriefs and questions and things, and we'd pray about it. One of the questions that we were asked is, does God have a word for someone here? And we're praying, and we must have prayed for a half an hour, just quiet time praying and answering questions. And I'm not hearing anything from God. And which, was weird because all the other questions during the week, everything, I'd just pray and you'd just get intense praying and you'd hear answers from God. And it was just obviously it's something that you wouldn't come up with. And during praying, Josiah said, does anybody need more time? And he said, okay, I'll give you 5 more minutes. As soon as he said that, my prayer went into auction mode. I was praying, it was obviously the Holy Spirit praying within me because I couldn't talk that fast as fast as I was praying for just the youth and for Kotzebue and for this church and everybody in it and our pastors and their pastors and just all this stuff going through my mind, praying for 5 minutes. And right at the end of the prayer, it said, what you're doing here is going to have an everlasting ripple effect on this region. And then I got the name Brooklyn. Well, come to find out, Brooklyn was a youth. She's, what was she, 15, I suppose? She was one of the youth that came to our service that night. And she's a leader in the community, a leader in her school. She's looked up to by everybody. And she... It was amazing. I asked God right after I prayed that, and I got that. I wrote my answer down. And I started praying again. I said, God, is that from me or was that from you? And immediately my whole body got hot, and I got goosebumps all over, and I started crying. And so I said, I know those answers were from God. And when I told these guys that, they started crying because because of who they knew Brooklyn was. I didn't really know Brooklyn. I didn't know the youth. I didn't deal with, directly with all those guys. I was helping these guys out and doing different projects around the church and everything I could do to help the church out. And later that week, Brooklyn gave her heart to Jesus. And throughout the week, she was helping with VBS. She was a leader for VBS. She was helping these guys out. She was at all the youth rallies. And she ended up winning a gift certificate that we were, random drawing for everything. She won a $50 gift certificate. And she went to the AC, which is the local grocery store where everything is 3 times the price it should be. They say ours is half price. Theirs is normal price. But she went there and she bought us a bunch of apples and carrots. And there was a picture up there at one point with the table with a bunch of carrots cut up and apples and pickled herring and different things. And then she had seal oil. So she fed all of us, a bunch of snacks with that gift card that she got. I mean, just to see the change in her heart was just amazing. It was just the whole experience of being up there was just a life-changing experience. It was so awesome, you know, being with these guys. I didn't know these guys real good before we went. I'm busy working, I'm busy doing everything I can, and I don't get a whole lot of time to connect with anybody. But on this trip, seeing all these guys change was just amazing. Seeing them pulling out of their shell and just answering questions and with wisdom that wasn't their own. It just obviously cannot be their own. And every one of them has a calling. And just to talk about that and, you know, amongst ourselves and each night, you know, during debriefing, you know, and praying over each other is just an amazing experience, the whole trip. And I didn't know what I was getting into there, but I hadn't been on a missions trip before. But I'm glad I went, and I suggest, you know, our mission field is here, or it can be across the world. But I suggest that everybody needs to get involved, and just you know, being with God intentionally like that, having intentional time with Him is just it's just amazing. I suggest it to everybody.
Yeah. It was an amazing week. And this team did an amazing job. You know, even the pastor there's like, you know, a month ago we had a YWAM team, which is young adults come and do stuff. And he said, I'm not trying to bash them at all, but he said, the maturity that your team has brought, the spiritual maturity, emotional maturity, their willingness to serve, he said, just far exceeds this group of adults that was here. And this team was amazing. And I think because of that, you know, God worked through them. And we had 25 kids at the Mega Sports Camp give their life to Jesus. I mean, we had over a fourth of the elementary school come through the Mega Sports Camp, which was amazing. And then we had, you know, 15 to 20 youth each night that were coming, which is unheard of in this area, a group that size. And 12 of them made a decision to follow Christ. And it was interesting. It was Brooklyn, who Adam was talking about, stood up to say, I want to follow Christ. And as she stood up, you'd watch around the room as everybody else started standing up. You know, and the first thought is, okay, well, how much do these other people really mean this? But then the second thought was, this is exactly what God had told Adam. The reality is even if they don't in this moment understand what they supposedly are saying, Jesus spoke to Brooklyn that week, and her life changed. And we believe there's going to be everlasting ripple effects in that community because of Brooklyn. And we saw that in that meeting. As she stood up, other people stood up. And when she goes to school and when she brings her Bible, other people are going to bring their Bible. And when she maybe starts a Bible study or goes to youth group, they're going to follow. And eventually they're going to get it, even if they don't right away. And it was amazing to see as God just transformed her. And, you know, a common theme that people were sharing, and this is what I'm going to just finish with. There isn't anything overly spiritual about Alaska. There honestly isn't anything overly spiritual about a missions trip. There is, however, something very incredible about taking time out of your life, out of your day, to eliminate distractions and to press into Jesus. Every single morning we did devotions together. We did something called SOAP, which is just, we all read through, we started off reading through the same chapter of the Bible and just like, God, give me one verse out of this chapter that you want me to just meditate on today. And then once someone got that verse, then they'd say, okay, how do I apply this to my life today? And we'd all go around the circle and just share what God was speaking to us that day. And that's how we started every day off. Then we finished every day with, like they said, usually 2 to 3 hours just in prayer. And we told the students, during the day, it's not about you. It's about the people of Kotzebue. Nothing is about you. If you come to us with some complaint about something about you, we're not even going to listen. During the day, it's about them. It's about how God can use us. But at night, it's about what God is doing in your life. And we saw night after night after night, people just get wrecked in the presence of God. It was amazing. My challenge to you is you don't have to go to Alaska. I would love to see people go on a missions trip, and we want to have an opportunity for more of a church-wide missions trip, not just one for teenagers. We'd love to see people go on a missions trip. But you don't need to do that to spend time with Jesus. You do, however, have to make him the priority, not a priority in your life. You have to carve time out to spend time in the Word, and not just to check it off of a list, but to actually say, God, what do you want to speak to me today? How can this change me today? And then spend time, give God an opportunity to actually speak to you. I hear people say all the time, man, God doesn't speak to me. Well, it's because you never stop talking. You can't have a conversation if one person is doing all the talking. If you don't stop and listen, how is God ever going to speak to you? So I'd encourage you guys this week, today, spend time in the Word. You know, and maybe not necessarily, I'm going to try and not that there's anything wrong with reading through the Bible in a year. I think that's great, and that's a habit we should have. But when it comes time to our time with Jesus and time in the Word, quality over quantity. Doesn't matter if you read 3 chapters if you walk away and you weren't changed. If you have to read one verse and just meditate on that verse to be changed, do it. If it takes you 10 years to get through that Bible, at least you have 10 years of being changed and transformed by Jesus instead of just reading through a book. Would you just pray with me as I close out the service?